Yapahuwa, situated near Maho Junction, is a less frequented attraction at the southwestern corner of the Cultural Triangle, though almost all visitors taking their time to climb to the summit and also visit the cave temple and museum will agree that for travelers interested in ancient history, Yapahuwa is one of the most rewarding sightseeing attractions found on the island. The reasons for this assertion are, Yapahuwa is a heritage site in a pretty charming setting, it has more than one attraction to offer, it is the location of an interesting part of the island's history, the function of the former buildings remains to be somewhat obscure. All in all, there is quite a lot to discover in Yapahuwa. Content of our Yapahuwa page. Traces of ancient defenses can still seen, a rare sight in Sri Lanka. Yapahuwa's most remarkable attraction, however, is the ornamental stairway, which is of a unique design and covered by plenty of excellent stone carvings. The steep stairway might give you a feeling of climbing a Maya pyramid in the jungles of Central America. One of its outstanding stone sculptures is the Yapahuwa lion, bringing to mind the style of Chinese lion figures. Yapahuwa's impressive specimen of Sri Lanka's heraldic animal can be seen on the 10 rupees note. Furthermore, the summit of the rock is a breathtaking vantage point overlooking the plains of Kurunegala district, a region also known as Wayamba. Yapahuwa likes to be called Sri Lanka's second Sigiriya. Indeed, there are some striking similarities. Like Sigiriya, Yapahuwa is an isolated rock rising abruptly almost 100 meters above the surrounding plains. Though there are ancient ruins of sacred buildings on the summit and rock shelves once inhabited by monks at the base and halfway to the top, the entire complex is not a religious sanctuary in the first place, but a royal palace enlarged to an entire city. Like Sigiriya, Yapahuwa is one of the very few surviving examples of an ancient citadel on the island. In Sri Lanka, the architectural concept of Yapahuwa is unique, as in the case of Sigiriya. There are even further analogies. Sigiriya is Sri Lanka's most significant provenance of ancient Roman coins. Yapahuwa is the island's place where most Chinese coins. The two kinds of coins are both evidences of Sri Lanka's international trade relations, though of very different periods. Whereas Sigiriya was the short-lived capital in the late 5th century, Yapahuwa was the island's capital for two very short periods in the late 13th century. Yapahuwa was one of the ephemeral capitals of the post-Polonnaruwa period, the late medieval centuries of Sri Lanka's history. Yapahuwa was one of several short-lived capitals established during the collapse of the Sinhalese civilization in the Cultural Triangle zone in the 13th century. Facing Tamil invasions from northern Sri Lanka and southern India, Bhuvanikabahuai, 1271–83, fortified this new royal city, protecting the national palladium, the tooth relic, as Yapahuwa was more easily defensible than Polonnaruwa, which remained to be the official Sinhalese capital, though the kings of the mid-13th century reigned from Dambadeniya and Kurunegala, before shifting the capital once more to Yapahuwa, later on again to Kurunegala and then to Gampala in the hill country in Kotte, in the tropical wet zone near the western coast. Soon after Bhuvanakabahu's death, Yapahuwa was captured by the army of the Pandyan dynasty from Madurai in southern India. They carried away the tooth relic to the Indian mainland. Soon after this event, Yapahuwa was almost abandoned and taken over again by reclusive monks and hermits, until it was re-established as a cave temple during the restoration period of Buddhism under the Kandyan king Kirti Sri Rajasingha in the 18th century. Yapahuwa is located in the Maho Divisional Secretariat, better known as Maho. It's the main heritage site of the Kurunegala district of the Northwestern Province, also known as Wayamba Province. It corresponds to the ancient principality called Dakanadisa during the Anuradhapura period. Yapahuwa lies almost midway between the provincial capital of Kurunegala and the neighboring provincial capital of Anuradhapura. The A28 road from Kurunegala to Anuradhapura crosses Maho. Yapahuwa Rock is in only 5 kilometers distance to the east of Maho, which is an important railway junctions, where the railway tracks from Colombo and Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa meet. Bus service to Yapahuwa is available from the Maho railway station. Names of Yapahuwa. The term Yapahuwa is stressed on the first syllable. As usual in the case of Sinhala names, there are various other English transcriptions of the toponym, such as Yapahuwa and Yapahu. Actually, the transliteration of the correct Sinhala name of the site is Yapahuwa. The term can be translated to outstanding hill or excellent mountain. The original ancient name is given in a rock inscription from the centuries BC, namely Yapahuwa, which translates to beautiful rock hill. The Yapahuwa rock rises quite abruptly to a height of 90 m from the surrounding plains. Only on its southern side, flights of steps and terraces permit access to the summit. The almost vertical northern, eastern, and western faces served as natural defense system, whereas the city to the south of the rock was fortified by walls. Yapahuwa is a nice monadnock, typical for the lowlands of Sri Lanka. Though the English term monadnock seems to derive from the Abenaki language of Northern American Algonquin tribes, such isolated residual gneiss rocks as seen in Sri Lanka are typical for the former Gondwana, the southern supercontinent which once incorporated the modern landmasses of Antarctica, South America, Africa, Madagascar, Arabian Peninsula, Indian subcontinent, and Australia. Particularly in these parts of the world, the presence of an inselberg indicates the existence of a former plateau. Starting at the visitor's entrance, which is to the southeast of the rock, visitors cross the gateways of two rings of ramparts and moats. The car park is between the outer and the inner city gate. The 3 outer and 3 inner gates were connected to causeways. The fortifications extend from northeastern to the southwestern part of Yapahuwa rock. They formed a semicircle or horseshoe to the south, the ends of which join the foot of the steep-sided rock. The fortified city was not of large size. It measured 500 m from east to west and 250 m from the base of the rock to the south, plus a smaller segment of less than 100 m width to the east. The outer fortification was an earthen rampart extending about 1.5 kilometers, once measuring about 6 m in height, with brick walls on the crest. No significant structures remain in the outer city between the two ramparts. Only bricks, tiles and potsherds were found in this area and in the vicinity. This part of the city seems to have been inhabited by noblemen and traders, whereas the inner city was the royal palace area. As in the case of Anuradhapura, Sigiriya and Polonnaruwa, it's probable that the majority of the population were peasants inhabiting the vicinity. This means they were living outside the fortified part of the city, which is the citadel. The inner fortification, which measures about half a kilometer in length, consists of a 4 m high rampart, which is more elaborately covered by large blocks of gneiss stone and additionally filled with metal. It is protected by a separate moat. The king's palace, the temple of the tooth and administrative buildings were probably located within the inner wall. At the base of the famous stairway, to the south of Yapahuwa rock, there are foundations of an ancient Buddhist shrine. Though this structure is often called an assembly hall, no evidence can be found for this function. 2 rows of stone pillars run close to the walls, but the center of the edifice is without pillars, indicating that this was once an atrium-like structure, with the roof only covering parts of the room and open in the middle. It may have surveyed as a building of the royal palace, but in fact stone architecture instead of wooden constructions was usually reserved to sacred edifices. The building is placed on a slightly elevated terrace of 3 small tiers. At the flight of steps leading to the hall, there are 2 balustrade stones with very simple carvings. To the west of this so-called assembly hall, there is another foundation of much longer and narrower building. Doubtlessly, the greatest showpiece of Yapahuwa is its ornate stairway which climbs steeply up to a natural terrace which once was the site of the royal palace and presumably the Tooth Temple. This terrace in a saddle at the southern slope of the rock is in about 35 m height above ground level. The entire stone stairway was originally in 3 stages. The original first flight has disappeared and is replaced by 24 cement steps. The partly artificial first terrace of this first wide landing is edged by almost vertical exterior walls, which may have served as an additional inner fortification. Long middle palace stairway of Yapahuwa. The longest and steepest stairway is the second one which leads from the first upper terrace to the second tier, which is in front of the most elaborate ornamental stairway. The second or middle stone stairway, which can be seen from the ground level, has 65 steps. Its railings are made of boxes of decreasing size, creating the illusion of a larger height of the entire structure, an optical effect used often in monumental architecture, for example at ancient Khmer temples. The steps are narrow and need to be maneuvered in a sideways fashion. This is said to have served as a kind of defense technique. However, as in the case of Maya of Khmer pyramids, such a narrowness often indicates that the steps are not made for human access in the first place but represent the sacrality of the elevated edifices, strictly separated from the common people. In this case, the structure at the top of the stairway was not just a palace but most probably the temple of the sacred tooth temple, too. The most ornamental stairway, the landmark of Yapahuwa, cannot be seen from ground level below at the base of the rock. Rather, OT becomes visible only after climbing the long second stairway. Arriving on the second tier in front of the shorter but more artistic third flight, visitors seeing this most prestigious edifice of Yapahuwa should not miss to walk to the left or right, too, in order to see the stone-carved decorations at the side of the top flight, completing the impression of excellent craftsmanship of Yapahuwa's main staircase. Sophisticated sculptures on both sides of the final flight of steps are masterpieces of sculptural art. The entire design is unique in Sri Lankan architecture. However, the ensemble with its acroteria resembles stairways of elevated state temples in Cambodia. Indeed, the 13th century was a period of contacts with Southeast Asia. But before jumping to conclusions, one should be aware that the main contacts were established with Thai people, who sought and reached independence from the Khmer Empire in the course of the 13th century, and that constructions of Khmer stone monuments had come to an end in the mid-13th century. As a matter of fact, ornate stairways with animal sculptures as acroteria are also known from Indian architecture, for instance at the 12th century Hosla temple of Bhucheshwara in Korvangala. Though not on such a large scale as in Khmer architecture or in Yapahuwa. Female figure at the front of the ornate stairway of Yapahuwa. The front of the highly ornate 35-step stairway from the late 13th century differs significantly from Sri Lanka's classical temple stairways, not only in size but also in its decorations. There is no Nagaraja or other guardian statue at the base. However, the front side of the voluminous balustrades is not completely undecorated. Simplified versions of temple decorations can be found at the base. A single Gana dwarf is on either side. Ganas usually occur in groups depicted in horizontal friezes in classical temple decorations of Sri Lanka. The same minimalism can be seen just above the Ganas. Bas reliefs of heavenly beings, a female dancer called Apsara in this case, are framed by a circular tendrils. This is a reflections of the much longer creepers with many more windings that can be seen on vertical temple pillars of the Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa periods quite frequently. Though no Nagaraja or other Dvarapala statue is in situ, the typical posture of Nagarajas, Tribanga, and carrying a pot with one raised hand, is present in an alienated way, as a graceful figure of a female and not on ground level as usual but close to the top of the facade on either side of the stairway. The boxes on 4 tiers of the massive balustrades are depicted as temples and miniature, a typical motif of South Indian temple architecture. Temple decoration display temples. Another religious symbol of fertility can be found at the roofs of the carved-out mini-temples, namely the Makara Torana or only its upper part, the Kirti Mukha lion monster face, tendrils growing out of its mouth. Such carved demon faces can often be seen at arches of Indian and Sri Lankan temples. The most remarkable features of Yapahuwa's ornate stairway, of course, are the big animal sculptures on the railings. The first one is not yet a 3-dimension sculpture but a relief, again depicting a Kirti Mukha. It can be seen on the same level as the roof of the second box with such a lion face. Kirti Mukha Leone faces are also known as Kihimbis in Sri Lanka. The most impressive sculptures are those of the 2 lions. The 2 stylized figures are shown in a complex posture, half kneeling, half sitting. The 2 stairway sculptures of Yapahuwa are the largest lion sculptures of ancient Sri Lanka, in fact the landmark statues of Yapahuwa. A depiction appears on the 10 rupee note. The style of these lion figures is unique in Sri Lanka. They resemble Chinese lion sculptures, particularly their goggle-eyed faces with wild manes. It's quite possible that the design is influenced by Chinese examples. There had been maritime trade contacts between China and Sri Lanka since antiquity, but mostly not directly but by several intermediaries along the trade route. However, this changed in the 13th century. The Yuan dynasty of Mongol rulers over the Chinese Empire, which chose Beijing as the new capital, is known to have dispatched an expedition in 1284 to Sri Lanka. Emperor Kublai Khan's aim was to seize the tooth relic, one of the most revered relics of Buddhism. Marco Polo is said to have been aboard this fleet. Definitely, Marco Polo came to Sri Lanka on his return voyage to Persia and finally Europe, in 1293, when another fleet of the Yuan Empire visited Sri Lanka. Trade relationships of the Yapahuwa kingdom with the Chinese Empire are well documented by the comparatively large amount of Chinese coins found in Yapahuwa. Sinharaja's sculpture at the Yapahuwa stairway. Behind the lion sculptures, on the next upper level, are two more sculptures of animals, mythical beings called guesthouses. Their upper parts are sculptured, whereas the legs can be seen as bas-reliefs on either side. Guesthouses translates to elephant lion. Such sculptures have bodies of lions with heads of elephants, with tuskers and their trunk extended. The body is facing the temple, whereas the face is turned to the opposite side. Such guesthouses depictions are almost unknown in the Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa periods, but they are depicted in Indian art already in the 1st millennium AD, and they became quite popular in the art of Southeast Asia in the 2nd millennium. From the Yapahuwa period onwards, guesthouses occur quite frequently in temple decorations of the Gampala and Kandy periods, also in the same winding posture at temple entrances, for instance at the Lankatilaka Vihara between Gampala and Kandy and at Kelaniya temple near Colombo. They replace the Makara balustrades of classical temples from the Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa periods. In a way, both mythical beings, crocodile dragons and elephant lions, resemble each other as both are depicted with large trunks. Doorway of Yapahuwa's former palace. Finally, at the top of the stairway, the visitor will reach an impressive doorway that once led to the terrace of the palace, probably including the Temple of the Tooth. The base of the doorway building is decorated with a series of slabs depicting musicians and dancers. They cannot be seen from the stairway, and the terrace below the main platform of the doorway cannot be reached easily. Thus, some visitors unaware of the existence of these panels might miss to see them. That would be regrettable. In fact, these bas-reliefs are one of the most remarkable features of the architectural ensemble of stairway and doorway, which in many respects is unique. The panels can be seen on almost the same level as the lion and guesthouses sculptures. Actually, there are two series of friezes, one on the same tier as the lion sculptures, just behind them, and the larger series on the level of the guesthouses. The two kinds of musicians differ significantly. The lower panels show dwarfs, similar to those playing gnomes that are known form carvings from the Anuradhapura period. These mythical beings are called Ganas. The musicians and dancers of the upper panels, however, show the shapes of human beings. Most of the panels depict one female dancer in between two male drummers. However, larger groups with two female dancers can be seen, too. Like in the traditional Sri Lankan court dance from the later Kandy period, some of the dancing positions are quite acrobatic. Each scene is distinct, not in the repetitive style of other friezes. The liveliness of Yapahuwa's depictions of dancers is unsurpassed in Sri Lankan art history. Both size and quality of the dancer reliefs is unique on the island. Like the guesthouses motif, the dancers and drummers have become a quite common theme of temple decoration since the Yapahuwa period. There are earlier depictions of dancers in Sri Lanka, but not on such a scale as in the case of the Yapahuwa doorway.